Well, this has been a while coming, it's 2021 and I've had the A7 III since it pretty much was released, and boy, I've taken this thing to some incredible places around the world, captured incredible moments that will pretty much last a lifetime. But as technology continues to evolve, the A7 III, it's getting a little bit old, and is it still worth it in 2021? All right, let's get it. So the A7 III was released in April 2019, and it's a brilliant 24 megapixel full frame BSI CMOS sensor. But when this camera was released, it was literally the best camera you could pretty much get when it comes to hybrid photo and video. It broke the internet, everyone wanted it. It was the most popular purchase in 2019, and it just demolished everything else in its price range, especially for what it offered. It really pushed Canon and Nikon to produce, their range, the EOS R, the Z6, Z7. And since then, there has been Panasonic that's come out with a whole bunch of full frame cameras. Fujifilm has produced incredible APS-C cameras, and Blackmagic has produced the 4K and 6K and 6K Pro, which are fabulous, fabulous cameras. Like, technology is just incredibly increasing at such a fast rate. We are so lucky to live in a time right now with all this technology and these types of machines that can capture such incredible looking photos and videos. But I must say, this thing is a jack of all trades, but it's a master of none. Unfortunately, it is really good at photo and video, but it is not the best at photo and video. Obviously, you have the A7S III that's incredible under low light and really good, I suppose, bit rate. It's got the 10-bit codec. It's got 4K 120. This one is, 4K 30, 1080 at 120, 8-bit codec. It is still powerful, it is still really good, but I cannot wait to see what Sony brings out with the A7 IV. But by all means, this thing really compares to some of the cameras today and is still really, really worth it. And I'm gonna give you a whole bunch of different categories and reasons why this might actually be the camera to choose in 2021. So for photography, now the A7 III makes a really great photography camera. It still holds up very well against the other competitors at 24 megapixels. This is pretty much all you really need when it comes to photos, when it comes to printing photos for weddings. I've done a whole bunch of weddings with this thing, and even billboards. Like, you can still create really good billboards with the 20 megapixel camera, that is for damn certain. Now, it's capable of shooting up to 10 frames per second in burst mode, and it can record to that dual SD card. Now, one of those SD cards is UHS 2, which can do obviously the faster recording, and one of them is just the regular UHS 1, which is still perfectly fine. You can do redundant recording as well. Now, it has 639 phase detection autofocus points, 425 contrast detection autofocus points, which is still pretty decent today. It has eye autofocus in photo mode, and it works pretty good. Now, it has a 2.63 million dot EVF, which unfortunately today is quite poor, especially when the A7S III has a 9.4 million dot EVF, which is just incredibly bright. I absolutely love it, but the EVF is still perfectly fine. Now, the rear screen, yeah, it isn't exactly great quality. Sony are just saving money by doing the exact same screens each time. It's not really that usable as well. It's got touch to focus, which is perfectly fine. Touch to focus has worked in very handy for me in so many different situations, especially if you are photographing or filming on the fly. It can actually be quite handy. And it only does just flip up as well. Obviously, the A7S III and a whole bunch of the new Sony cameras now flip out. But flipping up like this is actually still quite useful, and I kind of miss it. Flipping up sometimes is a little bit easier than flipping it up, out, and across. It's an extra step, but when you are photographing on the fly, flipping it up like this can actually be quite fast and handy. Now, one of the features that I love in this that the FX6 doesn't have is IBIS. This has in-body image stabilization, which is absolutely fantastic when it comes to photography, because if you do have a longer lens, you're gonna have a little bit more camera shake when you press that shutter button, and you may actually be introducing too much blur or camera shake to your image. And IBIS can actually help with that, so can OSS inside the lens. But if you don't have OSS inside the lens, like my Tamron 70-180, and your shutter speed is relatively low, you're probably going to get some blurry photos. I did notice that when I had my Nikon D750 back in the day and I had the 70-200, I was getting blurry photos if I wasn't having my shutter speed up high enough, because the Nikon body didn't have IBIS at the time. That lens didn't have IBIS, or OSS, or VR they call it. So IBIS can actually really help when it comes to photographers and slower shutter speeds. Overall, when it comes to photography, this camera still keeps up with cameras today, and I still would definitely recommend it for professional use, for weddings, for portraits, even for just travel photographers, product photographers. Perfectly fine. You are still getting a fantastic camera in 2021 when it comes to this 24 megapixel sensor. Now, video. This is where the A7 III pretty much got this name as the hybrid king, featuring the 6K sensor, which is a 24 megapixel backside illuminated sensor, which is incredible for low light performance. Actually really good low light performance when it comes to run and gun stuff. Really clean 4K image downsampled from 6K. Yes, it only has the 8-bit codec, which a lot of the Sony cameras now is coming out with the 10-bit codec, like this A7S III or FX6 that I'm shooting on right now. And S-Log in this thing, it's not exactly usable because you don't have as much, I suppose, data to work with and push and pulling the colors. So it becomes a little bit messy when you are grading log footage. So I do generally use HLG or Cine profiles. That can, be perfectly fine for that. Now it does, like I said, lack that full flip screen, which it is a little bit limited when it comes to content creators, especially YouTubers who want a flip screen and they are actually in front of the camera. Flip screen is not just for YouTubers and vloggers. It can be for professional filmmakers who actually just want to place the camera in a certain position and, without, I suppose, getting behind the camera and seeing their framing and composition. Now, I still really, really love the quality of the 4K footage in this. I do match it up with my FX6 sometimes as a B camera, especially if I'm doing a conference shoot or just an interview. This is absolutely fantastic. I chuck an 85 lens on it and it is brilliantly sharp. Autofocus is great. You don't have to worry about it. Yeah, it doesn't have that eye autofocus in video, which is very, very handy when it comes to A7S III and the FX6. But nonetheless, it is still actually quite usable and you won't have to worry about it too much. Now, once again, IBIS, like I said, is in this body for video. Very, 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 very handy. When it comes to the FX6, zero IBIS, zero stabilization. You do definitely notice it when the FX6 isn't kitted out, but when you've got a lot of weight to the camera, it starts to even out and you get some nice sort of natural movement when it comes to the shake of the camera. Whereas when you've got a smaller body, no IBIS, camera shake is just horrible. I hate it. The micro jitters suck. So having IBIS definitely does help with that, and it just gives you much more natural motion when it comes to handheld footage. So the rolling shutter on this thing it's relatively acceptable. It is nowhere near the A7S III or FX6. The A7S III and FX6 is pretty much non-existent when it comes to rolling shutter. It's a massive difference, and I mean, it's not like the A6400. That thing is horrendous when it comes to rolling shutter. This thing, it's bearable. It's not great, but you can still work with it. If you don't have too much moving objects, fast moving objects in your screen, you won't really notice too much of a difference. If you're whipping and panning your camera around, yeah, you'll notice a little bit of difference when it comes to rolling shutter, but if you're not doing that, you probably won't notice too much. Now, high speed frame rate is where the A7 III is showing its age. It only allows you to record 4K at 30 frames per second, whereas, the A7S III and the FX6 does 4K at 120 frames per second. This does 1080 at 120 frames per second. 1080 is still pretty decent, but between 4K and 1080, there's a fairly big difference. Now, the A7S III and the FX6 does 240 frames per second in 1080, which has actually come in handy for me in a couple of videos before. And hopefully the A7 IV will actually have those features. So the A7 III only has a micro HDMI port, which, you know, can be annoying when, especially when you're dealing with that really small finicky cord and you're moving it in certain positions and it can actually unclip. It's happened to me actually a few times when I switched over to the FX6 and you got the full size HDMI or SDI. Absolute game changer. SDI, you can't even pull it out because it locks in. It is absolutely fantastic, but you can still work with it nonetheless anyway. Now the preamps inside the A7 III is pretty decent. It's not too bad, handles audio quite well, especially if you do pair the Rode VideoMic Pro Plus. Absolutely fantastic audio. Definitely recommend that one to chuck on top of this bad boy.
Apologies for the lighting right now. All my lighting is actually in my car. I just came back from a pretty hectic shoot. But this is the audio you're going to be hearing out of the A7 III with the Rode VideoMic Pro Plus on top and compared to the audio that you're going to be listening to right now.
But unfortunately, I think when this camera came out, people were having actually problems with the 3.5mm audio jack. They were sending them back. There was a whole bunch of replacements. Thankfully, I, touch wood, haven't had any issues with this A7 III, but if you are buying it secondhand, make sure you do check out the audio and if the 3.5mm audio jack is working correctly, because that actually could be an issue. So unfortunately, I think that's just the luck of the draw. Sony did actually make these things relatively cheap, so maybe they put some cheaper parts in it. So I would be a little bit cautious when it comes to buying one of these secondhand, and just check that 3.5mm audio jack looks fine, and definitely plug in a shotgun mic into it, give it a test. Overall, one of these things with the flaps here on the side, I'm not a fan. It really is a little bit of a hassle, especially when you do have a whole bunch of cords attached into this. The A7 III did fix that with better doors, and thank God for that. But it's just nitpicking, little stuff here and there you may actually get a little bit annoyed at. But overall, this thing is still really good in 2021. It's probably going to be good for another 2 to 3 years before technology catches up, and you know, there are going to be so many other cameras to get. But I most certainly will be doing an A7 III in 2022 and see how that performs against the cameras that are going to be coming out. Obviously, you've got the A7C, which is pretty much just a recycled A7 III with a flip screen, no EVF, so or smaller EVF anyway. But other than that, guys, this is the video of the A7 III. You're still going to get a bargain in 2021. I most certainly do think it's still worth it, especially if you are looking to get into the full frame. I 100% recommend this one, or the A7C. It may even suit you when it comes to that flip screen, but yeah, decision is yours. I like this thing. If you could pick it up secondhand, go for it. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that thumbs up. That would be absolutely amazing. Subscribe to my YouTube channel if you already haven't. Yeah, guys, I'll see you in the next one. All right, let's get it.